The limits of my language mean the limits of my world. Hello to all viewers of my channel. That incredible idea is what we're going to dive into today. You know, this quote from Wittgenstein, it's not just some clever phrase you'd find in a book. It's really the core of what we're unpacking. It suggests that the words we use aren't just simple labels for things, but they're actually the very boundaries of our reality. So, that leads us right to the big question, doesn't it? Is language just a tool we pick up and use, like a hammer? Or is it something much deeper? Is it the actual operating system for our minds, actively shaping how we perceive, how we think, and even how we feel? Well, let's find out. Okay, so first, let's take a look back through history. Because for thousands of years, we've had this deep gut feeling that language holds this immense, almost mystical power. I mean, think about the legend of the Tower of Babel. It's a perfect example, right? It tells of a time when all of humanity was united by a single language, and because of that, they could achieve anything. That is, until their languages were scattered, and with it, all their power. The Quran sees this diversity a bit differently, more as a way to make sure ideas could be clearly explained to every nation. And then, much more recently, the writer Primo Levi talked about how our languages, which are built for our small human lives, just feel clumsy, totally inadequate when we try to describe the sheer vastness of the universe. All these stories are telling us the same thing. We have always known, deep down, that language is so much more than just words. All right, now let's jump from that ancient wisdom straight into modern neuroscience, because what scientists have discovered about the bilingual brain is truly mind-bending. And trust me, it does not work the way you probably think it does. The key idea here is something called co-activation. See, for a really long time, we pictured bilinguals having this little mental switch to turn one language off and the other one on. But it turns out that's not what happens at all. All the languages a person knows are, get this, always active, all at once, just running in the background. It's less like a switch and way more like an orchestra, where different instruments step forward at different times, but they're all there, ready to play. So here's a perfect example of that co-activation in action. When a monolingual English speaker hears the word speaker, their brain might also light up with words that sound kind of similar like spear. Makes sense. But a Russian English bilingual's brain does something extra. It hears speaker, it activates the English word spear, and because spear sounds a bit like the Russian word for matches, which is spichki, it activates that whole concept too. And this all happens in a fraction of a second. Wild, right? What this really shows is that the bilingual brain is essentially a superorganism. It is capable of parallel processing information all the time. It's constantly sifting through multiple linguistic databases at once. And this isn't some inefficient glitch. It's a highly sophisticated cognitive function that creates connections that, for a monolingual brain, just don't exist. So, if the brain is wired so differently, what does that actually mean for the person? Well, it turns out this parallel processing has real, tangible effects on your personality, your memories, and even the moral choices you make. Just take memory, for example. In one study, when Mandarin English bilinguals were asked in English about the start of World War II, they'd often say Pearl Harbor. But when they were asked the exact same question in Mandarin, they'd answer Lu Guoqiao 1937, which was the start of the Second Sino-Japanese War. It's the same person, the same brain, the same knowledge, but the language used acted like a cultural key, unlocking a completely different set of memories. Language also carries this incredibly deep emotional weight. Like Nelson Mandela said, speaking to someone in their native tongue, that goes to their heart. Our first language is tied to our childhood, our family, our core emotions. A second language, one we often learn later in life, can provide a kind of emotional distance. And that can be a surprisingly useful tool. Let's see how this plays out in a classic ethical test, the trolley problem. So imagine a runaway trolley is about to hit 5 people tied to the tracks. You're on a bridge overlooking the scene. You can save them, but only by pushing one very large person off the bridge and into the trolley's path, sacrificing them to save the others. It's a gut-wrenching decision. What would you do? When people were posed this dilemma in their native language, the language of their heart, only about 20% said they would push the person. The act just feels too close, too personal, too real. But, and this is the amazing part, when they were asked the exact same question in their second language, the number who would push the person jumped to 33%. That is a massive shift. That emotional distance of the second language allowed for a colder, more logical, more utilitarian calculation. It literally changed their moral calculus. Just think about the implications of that for everything from international business deals to global diplomacy, where these huge decisions are often made in a non-native language. So what you get when you combine this parallel processing with this emotional flexibility is a real, tangible superpower, an enhanced ability to see the world differently. And that, my friends, is the very essence of creativity. A great way to think about this is the Boggle board analogy. In the game Boggle, you have a grid of letters, but if you physically pick up the board and turn it, your perspective shifts and you instantly see all these new words that were totally hidden before. The letters themselves didn't change, but your way of seeing them did. Learning a new language is like giving your brain a permanent ability to turn that board anytime you want. The poet Li Young Lee describes this experience just beautifully. When he was learning English, he started finding connections between words that a native speaker might just completely miss. Because fight and fright sounded so similar to him, he linked them together in his mind. Fight was what I did when I was frightened. And he connected wrens and yarn because of how they felt to say, leading to this amazing poetic line, "Wrens are soft as yarn." He was seeing these hidden connections that were invisible to almost everyone else. Now, this isn't just a cool poetic idea. The data absolutely backs it up. Study after study shows that on tasks that measure divergent thinking, which is the ability to find many unique solutions to a single problem, bilinguals consistently outperform their monolingual peers. They simply have more pathways to get to an answer. And all of this brings us to a final, really profound philosophical idea, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which basically asks, are we living inside a kind of prison built from our own language? So this hypothesis suggests that language isn't just a tool we use to describe reality, it actually constructs reality for us. The categories, the grammar, the vocabulary of our native tongue, they create the very channels through which we experience the entire world. If your language doesn't have a word for something, it's that much harder to even perceive. Let's look at some real-world examples. In English, we basically have one main word for blue. But in Russian, there are two completely distinct words, golduboy for light blue and sinyi for dark blue. And studies actually show that because of this, Russian speakers are measurably faster at telling the difference between shades of blue. Their language has literally sharpened their perception. It's the same with time. English speakers tend to think of time horizontally. We look forward to the future. But Mandarin speakers can also think of time vertically, using words that mean up for earlier events and down for later ones. But here's the good news. Language isn't a prison with no escape. It's more like a room. And every new language you learn is a key that unlocks a door to a new room with a brand new window looking out onto the exact same world. You're not just adding words to your vocabulary, you are literally rewiring your brain and gaining a whole new perspective. So I'll just leave you with this final thought. If the language you speak is the lens through which you see reality, how many worlds, how many different versions of reality are you missing out on seeing? How many other worlds are out there just waiting to be perceived, only one new language away? If this explainer gave you a new perspective, subscribe to the channel and like, and also suggest your topics for future videos in the comments.